Budget bickering continues in Illinois just weeks before the stopgap budget runs out. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Yes, the budget year is the year is winding down, and the budget that we have for a half a year is running out, and we're going to talk about it with a couple of people who cover the State House for us. Jordan Abudayyeh is back. She's State House reporter for WICS News Channel 20 in Springfield. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
And Brian Mackey, State House reporter for Illinois Public Radio. Welcome back to you.
Thank you, Bernie. Glad
Okay. BossMadigan.com and budget talks. Let's talk about it. So the governor, Governor Rauner, a couple weeks ago said, I want to meet every day with the legislative leaders. And then they've met some days. And then he canceled the latest meeting over a disagreement, saying he said the Democrats should bring a budget and they weren't ready. And the Democrats say that's an executive function to propose a budget. So we're kind of up in the air again, and the stopgap, which provided some funding for some programs, which expires at the end of December, which is in the middle of the state's fiscal year. What's going on? As we tape this show, we don't have a meeting set.
So there's no meeting. The meeting today that was supposed to go on was canceled. We don't really know what the future holds at this point. You know, a couple weeks ago we did see the governor say we're going to have these meetings every day, and then he was the one that canceled it. So that seems like a flip-flop on his part. And when he signed that Exelon bill, he gave the speech in Clinton at 2 o'clock in the afternoon saying, I'm going to go have a meeting the next day, and then his own office canceled that meeting. So I don't know who's making those decisions behind the scenes in the Rauner administration, but I think it reflects negatively on him. I mean, you have Cullerton and Madigan both coming out and saying we didn't think the meeting needed to be canceled, and this really puts the ball in their court to kind of shift the blame on him. And if we're going to play politics, which is what all of this is at the moment, I think he let this one slip.
Brian, what intelligence can you lend to what is basically a crazy situation?
I mean, that's just it. It doesn't seem like either side is really eager to do what it's going to take to solve this problem right now, which is raise taxes and make drastic cuts in spending in Illinois. The governor and the Republicans say we won't talk about the budget unless you adopt my agenda.
Or parts of it.
Well, yes. So whatever the latest version pared down of his agenda is, which it lately has included changes to the workers' compensation system, changes to the tort law system, term limits, property tax freezes, and also reduction in the power of unions at the local government level. Democrats, on the other hand, say, no, let's just talk about the budget. This budget is separate from these other things, and that's that. They don't seem to be able to get on the same page.
And we could have told the same story a year ago and a year and a half ago, because really nothing has changed.
You can just replay the same show from a year ago, save ourselves a lot of time.
Yeah, I will say, I think Jordan, you might have been there too, when the governor appeared at a electrical services company west of Springfield about 3 weeks ago and said to a group of business people, my number one priority is workers' compensation, get those costs down so Indiana quits stealing our jobs. And then he put out a video some days later saying, I won't pass a stopgap budget, which he accused the Democrats of wanting for the next 6 months, although they use different terminology. But he says, I won't, unless there's a property tax freeze, permanent, and term limits, which means putting term limits on the ballot, which would put it on the ballot, and it's a popular notion, and you can argue if it's good or bad, put it on the ballot in November of 2018 when the governor plans to be on the ballot for his re-election for what he hopes will be his second term. So again, that's just one big shift in a matter of days.
And just maybe we should give a little bit of background there. It's not uncommon for politicians to put things on the ballot that they think will help them and get turnout for them, right? So we saw this in 2004 at the presidential level. Karl Rove, President Bush's advisor, put a lot of anti-same-sex marriage initiatives on ballots in key states. We saw the Democrats try this in 2014 here in Illinois, where they put a
millionaire's tax.
Yeah, millionaire's tax, an advisory referendum on the minimum wage, which are issues that are popular with Democrats. They had no legal meaning in Illinois, and we've seen neither a millionaire's tax nor an increase in the minimum wage since both of those were approved by the voters or suggested by the voters at that. But this is a tried and true tactic, and we certainly saw the governor trying to ride the term limits initiative in his 2014 campaign.
Well, he did. He gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures and probably got data on how to reach those people when it was time to remind folks to vote, which is what both sides also do now with data-driven campaigns. I mentioned as I opened the discussion in this bossmadigan.com, and it's something that popped up the second or the last week of the veto session. It's the state Republican Party and the state Republican Party had some success, even though Susana Mendoza won as comptroller in a statewide race, and the U.S. Senate race went to Tammy Duckworth. So 2 Democrats won 2 statewide races, but Republicans were able to pick up a net 4 seats in the Illinois House and 2 in the Senate, even though Democrats still have strong majorities in both houses. So the Republican Party has put out, they had linked all the Democratic candidates to Speaker Madigan, who is the bad guy that Governor Rauner claims because Madigan has been Speaker for like 28 of the last 30 years or so, that you can blame things on him and he's blocking things, whereas the Democrats say Governor Rauner is the one who's not compromising because he won't talk about a budget without those other items. But they've put out a website continuing to link Democrats to Speaker Madigan. They had a guy at the State House, a tracker, follow one of the reps like in the parking lot and try to get him to say on tape, "Are you going to vote for Speaker Madigan again?" And then when the guy didn't give an answer, basically said, "You'll have to ask him," which the Republicans must have thought was a great thing for him to say because it showed either weakness or he was deferring to the leader. They put out a press release on it. They've put out really almost dozens of press releases. Will you, the Democrat, vote to bail out Chicago and override the governor on $200 million he vetoed for schools up there? Or will you disassociate yourself from Boss Madigan? All of this is going on as the governor is meeting with Madigan and trying to get an agreement. What's the deal? Is this going to work right after an election?
It seems like we waited for the election because we didn't want to come up with a budget and take tough votes during a campaign season. I think a lot of people thought the election would mean the campaign season would be over, we would come and we would start governing and legislating and doing our jobs. That has not happened. The campaign has continued. And, I've asked the Republican leaders about this. I haven't seen Governor Rauner in a few weeks to ask him about this. But when you are the governor and you are at the top of this party structure, that's the way that you want it to be. You've donated upwards of $30 million to this infrastructure throughout the state. Then I think at some point you have to take responsibility for what the party is doing with your money and what is going on.
But he said when he was asked in Chicago, I saw him say, that's just politics. People have to deal with it, and I have nothing to do with it.
I just don't know how far that goes. It is politics, and people do have to deal with it, and they are politicians. But when you're trying to sit across from a table and negotiate with someone that you have made the enemy in a campaign and then continued past the campaign, I don't know how he expects Republicans to not look bad for doing that. You could say what you want about Madigan and the Democrats, but they're not the ones filling people's inboxes every day now with, different kinds of opposition pieces. So, if you're going to be negotiating with them, and I don't know, this poisons the well. I think even if you are a seasoned politician, this is kind of poisoning things.
Yeah.
I have a couple of thoughts on this. On the one hand, I think the media has done a really good job of amplifying the Republican. The group of unions put out a website earlier this year, I think, called RaunerRuinsLives.com, and I don't think that got nearly the play in the media. And so that does kind of point out that the Republicans in Illinois, under the leadership of Governor Rauner, have really developed a sophisticated statewide message. And that message is Speaker Madigan is the root of all evil. And even if you are not in the House, you've never served in the House, perhaps you've only met the Speaker at a fundraiser or cocktail party or something, you are going to be tied to Speaker Madigan if you're a Democrat in Illinois. And it shows that on the other side, the Democrats really don't have a countervailing message. They have not had the resources of Governor Rauner and one person sort of directing them. The Democrats have their own internal considerations. You have the Senate, you have the House, you have other people who are vying to be governor. We can talk about that a little bit later. So, I mean, I think that it does show that the Republicans have brought a DC-style constant campaign message war to Illinois that the Democrats simply have not been able to match yet. The other thing I think it shows is that despite what the governor says about just trying to distance himself from this, and despite how he says we can negotiate over the things that we need to for government without worrying about the politics, I think it shows that the end result of Governor Rauner's agenda is really trying to weaken the Democratic Party. You look at everything he's doing, whether it's going after labor unions, that's a key fundraising source for the Democrats. He's talked a lot about changing things that trial lawyers wouldn't like, either in the tort law system or workers' compensation. Trial lawyers are another big fundraising source for Democrats. And his constant attacks on the speaker, and also trying to change redistricting, which we're only 4 years away now from when we're going to be drawing new legislative maps in Illinois. Right. And I think there's a connecting thread there that's perhaps really the end goal, even though he doesn't really talk about that, is really changing the political map of Illinois.
Right. I will say Governor Rauner has said all along, I'm open to new revenue, but not without reforms, and his reforms are these things you're talking about. And the Democrats say those reforms, many of them, first of all, they don't think he campaigned on them, which he didn't really stress them during the general election. In my view, he did during the primary. But they basically don't want to do those things. But they know more money is needed. Everybody knows more money is needed. But when the governor, for example, recently said, I'm waiting for you to propose the budget, it's because then you can blame the Democrats for raising taxes. And they want him to propose a budget as governor. And they say he's never really proposed a balanced one because it's always with these caveats, well, we'll have pension reform and we'll hope to get some money. But if you don't have it in hand, you're really not supposed to propose it that way. Well, so whoever proposes the budget is going to be blamed by the other side for raising taxes. That's why we're in the middle of this craziness. And universities aren't going to get new funding. Students are being told in high school, maybe by their counselors, go to college out of state because we don't know how the funding is at some of these colleges. MAP grants, the ones for lower income students to get $4,000 or $5,000 to help, they were funded just for the past year in the stopgap, and there's no new money available right now for that. And the past due bill ledger is at more than $10 billion in the state. With
the blame game that you were talking about, I think too it's interesting we've seen a shift in Speaker Madigan's message with the last week of veto session talking about it's Governor Rauner's lame duck tax increase. Like, this was Governor Rauner's idea, this is what he's pushing. We even saw a resolution go to the House floor saying, we should ban lame duck votes on tax increases. And so I think this is Speaker Madigan's way of saying, I'm not going to support a lame duck tax increase because when next time the election rolls around, it's going to be Madigan's lame duck tax increase. And who are people going to believe in the court of public opinion? That Speaker Madigan came up with the lame duck tax increase, an already very vitriolic character in the state of Illinois, or Governor Rauner. And so I think Speaker Madigan sees that. I think he's already changing his message. So I really don't have any hope that we're going to see new revenue.
Well, this is very tough because we've used to be if you went 17 days over at the end of a session, like I think it was about that long in 1991 when Jim Edgar took over and Mike Madigan was Speaker. People went crazy. How can we have no budget for 17 days? And now we're going into we're approaching 2 years.
17 months.
Yeah.
We've been 17 months without a budget. And I think the question that this points out two things. One of the questions is, what are these reforms, quote unquote reforms, worth, right? This is, we were talking last week, I think we were all there when, after one of the leaders' meetings in the last week of veto session in the Capitol, Senate Republican leader Christine Radogno came out and said that the so-called reforms and the budget are linked. They have to go together because the state needs these savings because the state pays workers' compensation claims. Strangely enough, when I asked her and later her spokesman and the State Department of Central Management Services, how much does Illinois spend on workers' compensation, and I asked her what are these quote-unquote reforms worth, didn't have an answer right away. And the question is the Institute of Government and Public Affairs at the U of I says that we are generating a $13 billion deficit for just this fiscal year, 14 for the next 5 years.
And we only spend about between 30 and 40 billion a year in the entire state government.
It's insane. We are in a car that is speeding down the highway, and we've just keep adding bricks to the gas pedal, and the steering wheel has been thrown out. And
interesting.
why are we holding out for this? That's the question that I don't know we've gotten a really good answer to from the administration.
And I think what the governor will say is, like in term limits, which aren't necessarily a budget thing, but it will send a message to business that we're changing and Illinois is a better place politically. And people are waiting to come, and there's a list of them, and we're going to have them come to Illinois. And I once asked him, I had heard him say that somewhere else, I had heard a tape of it, and then I'd asked him at a Springfield press conference, who are these companies? I'm not going to tell you. You don't negotiate that way. So we don't know what that list is of people just ready to rush into Illinois if we get a couple of his reforms passed.
Well, and it's telling that he gave a speech to the Illinois Farm Bureau this past Monday.
Up in Chicago,
yeah.
A good agricultural area.
Yeah, definitely. And I listened to it, and I want to say, I can't remember if it was a year ago or 2 years ago he gave a speech. I believe it was also to the Farm Bureau, and it was so similar. You'd think he was still a candidate from the tone of this speech. Boy, I need to be going to Texas. I want to go to Nashville. I'm going to do it on my own
grab those
nickel.
Jobs.
We should be kicking Texas's tail. That's
right.
What he says. Right. And at what point does he start doing that? Of course, he can say, well, the Democrats have not given me the legislative agenda I need to do so, so therefore I can't do it. But at some point you have to wonder if the voters are going to, as he's getting into 2 more years potentially of more budget standoff, are the voters going to ask, how long do we have to wait for these businesses to come here?
Well, one thing that changed in the state government this past week is Susana Mendoza was sworn in a nice ceremony in the Rotunda with her husband and her son, who had just turned 4 and was very cute, and her mother, who's also named Susana Mendoza, and started to take the pledge, get sworn in with her, and she says, Mom, you get 2 for 1, the new comptroller told us after that. And basically, she is saying, I'm going to prioritize better, and I'm, give you some good figures. What change will this bring?
I'm not sure how much change it's going to bring. We've never been in this situation. I think maybe she could make Governor Rauner's life managing a budget crisis easier or harder, depending on some of the things that she prioritizes. But, so much of the state's spending is being mandated by courts and consent decrees. And so, she can prioritize payments. She can maybe, put the lawmakers' paychecks. But I don't know how much is really going to change.
Right. And I should have said, and most people watching this show know, but the comptroller pays the bills. So she doesn't invest the money. She gets whatever money she has. And Leslie Munger, who was appointed by Governor Rauner after Judy Bartopinka passed away after her last election, had always said, it's like you've got $100 and you've got $10,000 in bills. Where do you pay it? And that was just to add some zeros, and that's where the state has been.
Well, and that's a really good point, because this backlog, while it's bad and getting worse now, it's not a unique situation or a new situation to have a backlog of bills in Illinois. And the last several controllers have had to make these decisions about if a charity organization, or I shouldn't say a charity, a social service organization that is a state contractor, the state used to do something like, say, treat people with substance abuse disorders, and now we've outsourced that task to this private organization. They are owed money by the state. If they call and say, we're going to have to shut our doors, then maybe the controller can bump up their payment. And that's something that I know has happened at least as far back as Judy Bartopinka. Leslie Munger, the immediate past controller, used to, made a point of doing that. But there are ways I think she could, as we've seen already, with delaying state bonus payments. So the governor had approved bonuses for a lot of his staff members.
If you didn't have many days off in a year, you could get an extra $1,000. So Susana Mendoza says, we're not going to pay that, because that would be about $4 million a year, and we could use that for more critical needs. On the other hand, there was also some court action this week in the ongoing contract dispute between AFSCME, the largest state worker union, and the Rauner administration, and they haven't reached a contract agreement since the expiration of, I think it was July 1st of 15. And even though one court, or the State Labor Relations Board, declared an impasse, which is what the governor has been going on and saying, part of that is I can impose contract terms, including this nice bonus for you. The next day, a St. Clair County circuit judge issued a ruling saying that they cannot impose terms, so they couldn't pay. Then the governor's office blamed a combination of, well, we're not sure we even believe that that court decision in St. Clair County applies, because we now have a written ruling from the State Labor Relations Board, but AFSCME is stopping its own members from getting the $1,000. And then Susana Mendoza said, we're not going to pay it anyway. So take your pick.
Well, and I think the bonus that Mendoza was talking about applied to other state employees too. I believe beyond just the AFSCME bargaining unit members.
Okay, yeah, it might have been a manager thing.
Some of those might have gone out. But you're right. I mean, this contract dispute again is a key thing. We've even heard that apparently there's been reports that and I believe Speaker Madigan maybe said this explicitly. I can't remember in his statement last week that the status of contract negotiations are something that they want to bring into the governor's talks with the legislative leaders. Right. The Democrats do anyway. And this is once again an area where the governor is really trying to fundamentally change state government by weakening the biggest labor union for state government employees.
Well, we'll see where that goes. I should mention, and it's become a really political football, but 6 Democratic members of the legislature, none from Central Illinois, filed a recent lawsuit saying we should be paid because Comptroller Munger, who is now the former Republican comptroller, had said, I'm going to put legislators in line with everybody else. And so they haven't been paid, and some of them only work this job, although they don't get a lot of great feeling from the public anyway. But they haven't been paid since like May. I think they got the payment in August for May. So it's been like 6 months without pay. They've gone to court saying our Constitution says you can't diminish a legislator's pay in midterm because you shouldn't be able to use their paychecks to force them to do things. So you have our governor, who by the way made $188 million last year, but is taking only like $1 for his current office, said, putting out videos and a press conference. He's disgusted with these legislators who put themselves ahead of human services. You've got Comptroller Munger had said something similar, and they should drop the lawsuit. Susana Mendoza says the same thing in a sense, but says it lighter. I'm not going to pay them. They're going to. I hope my colleagues understand. My former colleague says she was in the House for 10 years. Understand that I'm not going to pay you until you're at the back of the line. Legitimate, or is this just theater? It is theater unless you depend on this, income.
The whole thing is a political football. To me, the idea of delaying a lawmaker's paycheck for Comptroller Munger was incredibly popular, and she knew that she was facing an election, and to me it seemed like a political move. I mean, the minute that story was put on social media, it blew up because people love the idea. They already don't like politicians. They already don't trust them. They think they're good for nothing because they haven't passed a budget in almost 2 years. And so they think, when I don't do my job, I get fired. And they think that this was a good way to punish lawmakers. But I think it started as a political maneuver, and I think it's continuing as a political maneuver. Susana Mendoza knows it was popular. Why do you think
she advertised on it too when she ran against Leslie Munger?
So but I do think the lawmakers make a good point. I mean, we have a separation of powers, and you shouldn't be allowed to pressure lawmakers into making a decision. It hasn't worked thus far anyway. I mean, we still don't have a budget, and they haven't been paid. Right.
And truly, the rank and file lawmakers in the era of leadership meetings and governors, which has gone on for like 25 years. If the leaders and the governor can't agree on something, the legislators have nothing to vote on, and they can yell all they want. It's not going to happen.
Right. So
I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's the way it is.
I see the political games that are being played with it, and I understand the public's point of view. But in the same respect, I mean, many of these lawmakers are good people, and they do this full time.
I would say I'm not sympathetic, Bernie, to the argument that rank and file legislators can't do anything. I think that we have seen the leadership respond to intense pressure. The Republicans went along with child care assistance funding when they were pressured from the bottom up to make a compromise with Democrats.
Yes,
it can happen.
I didn't mean to speak absolutely.
No. I think it should probably happen more. I think that we would have less of a crisis if we actually had leadership by from more of rank and file legislators. I would also say that this argument that they're not doing their job because we don't have a budget, that you hear that as a talking point a lot. The Democrats will say, we are doing our job by opposing an agenda that we think is bad for the people of Illinois. And so
And they'll also say that they've passed a couple of budgets, which the governor said was wildly out of balance. But he could have vetoed them with the reduction veto and cut it down, but he just vetoed the whole thing.
Neither side has clean hands on that.
At least the first year, yeah.
But I would say this goes to a more fundamental question about Illinois, and it's not popular to talk about salaries for legislators, but we do have a professional legislature here. Some states, legislators get a pittance, and the people you tend to get as legislators in those states are lawyers, bankers, real estate agents, people who can take time away from their jobs, physicians, to do legislative work. If you want to have a legislature with more middle-class people in it, people who have to quit jobs as teachers or journalists perhaps, or other things to become state legislators, for better and worse, then you have to be willing to pay them perhaps a little bit more.
Yeah, and we're paid like 67,000 base, but most get another 10 or so for committee work. Let's just talk briefly. The governor had a bit of a victory tour this year, depending on your view, but Exelon bill, the big power company, Ameren was involved to some extent, but it's mostly, there was a bill passed quickly during the veto session to keep open for at least, I think it's 10 or more years, nuclear power plants that are losing some money in Clinton and Cordova near the Quad Cities. The governor went to both cities to sign the bill. I'm not sure which was the real signing. Hands in the air, lots of people happy with that. So he was able to get a win in that regard, but rates will go up some for some people, and there are differing views on that. And you even had some conservation people liking this because it was clean energy. So I guess they can work together when they want to, and when a bunch of lobbyists get hired by a power company.
Right, when the most powerful lobbying entity in state government is behind something, they can sure sing Kumbaya together and pass a rate hike on customers, which it's interesting that that was not in the governor's press release, so that this will eventually result in higher pay.
And it sounded a little like a campaign stop to me when I listened to his speech in Clinton. It was maybe 5 minutes of actually talking about the bill, and then we got some turnaround agenda in there. We got some "I'm fighting for you." There was some raucous yelling and cheering. It was definitely a success tour that he thought he was on.
They had some big rallies at the State House with a lot of people from those who worked at those places, because it's like 1,500 employees of both. A lot of people and their families came to the State House to push this in the past, and it finally got done. We had mentioned earlier Democrats that might run for governor, just make some mention. Chris Kennedy, Robert Kennedy's son, lives in the suburbs. J.B. Pritzker of the Hyatt Hotel family. Sherry Bustos, member of Congress, is a possibility. There's been a little talk of Daniel Biss, a state senator from Evanston. We don't know what's going to happen. Those are the Democrats that might run against Bruce Rauner. We know he's going to run again. I also wanted to mention that the president of the University of Illinois, Killeen, said that the 3 campuses of the U of I will not be sanctuary sites, and that's been somewhat of an issue. And that just kind of takes the pressure off, because with the Trump administration coming in, there's been a lot of pressure for what are we going to do about whatever small number of undocumented people on campus are going to be able to stay, and they just said we have to follow the law. So I guess that's where we go.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that this is, there's a lot of fear out there. As many people are very excited about President-elect Trump's victory and the fact, idea that he's going to make America great again, there are a lot of people who are afraid of knocks in the night, where deportations were going to be coming, and there are a lot of, some number of undocumented students
and we will just
campuses,
have to see where it goes. Jordan Abudayyeh, thank you for coming back. Brian Mackey, thanks for your thoughts. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.